Heyo everybody, Zack here and welcome to another episode of Daily Rider. Our guest today is a legend, everybody. That is a 1969 Kawasaki H1 Mach 3. It is a 500cc 3-cylinder air-cooled 2-stroke engine that makes about 60 horsepower and a bike that weighs less than 400 pounds. And when it was brandy spanking new, it would cost you $999. Now, I know those numbers don't seem very big or impressive right now, but just close your eyes for a moment. Imagine it's 1969. Kawasaki has been in business in the United States for less than 10 years. It wants to make an impact on the American market, and so it releases this, which was, at the time, the fastest production motorcycle in the world. We've come a long way since 1969, obviously, but today on the ride to work, we're going to take in some of the sights, the smells, the sounds of 1969 and talk about how motorcycles become legendary. I'm excited, everybody. Let's ride! All right, everybody. Before we dive into this Daily Rider classic, a quick reminder that this episode is brought to you by RevZilla. RevZilla is not just the YouTube channel that you're watching, it's also an e-commerce platform where you can buy things for you and your motorcycle. So the next time you need a helmet, saddlebags, a jacket, boots, two-stroke oil, a bike cover, perhaps, you can find all that stuff at RevZilla, and when you shop, you'll be supporting programs like this. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Alrighty, so here we are, Kawasaki H1 Mach 3. It is quite a thing, isn't it, this engine? It is rudimentary as heck. Where do you start? It's 366cc cylinders next to each other. It is a very basic primal sort of mill, not a lot of moving parts, as we'll discuss at some point today. 3 big old carburetors at the back here, and you'll be able to hear air getting sucked in through these air cleaners when we get on the throttle. They're not stock chambers, as you'll hear when it fires up. It makes quite the noise. And where this engine is sitting is maybe the most surprising thing, because it's a fairly powerful little engine there, and it's sitting in a pretty antiquated chassis because those were the times. It's a double cradle steel frame, very basic, twin shocks, spindly little, I think they're 34 mil fork legs, but anyway, they're sort of small and feeble, just like the brake. It's a very simple drum brake up there. There's not a whole lot going on aside from the engine, and that's what this bike was all about. It was just all engine. It was all about acceleration, straight line speed, and may the good Lord help you when it comes to turning and stopping and that kind of thing. This bike does have a couple of upgrades. Of course, it has some upgraded Hagon shocks, and it's been restored to a fairly large extent. It has modern Continental tires on it, an 18-inch in the back and 19 in the front, which are sort of odd sizes for this day and age. It's an engine, big swoopy pipes, and just a seat, a handlebar to hold on to, some brakes, kind of, headlight and a taillight. And that is pretty much it. Doesn't even have blinkers. So I'll be doing my best to use my hands to signal on the ride today. A couple other things I suppose we could note. Very classic 60s and 70s seat, right? It's just a big flat perch, which as we'll talk about, actually not bad for the passenger, as the pegs are fairly low here. Also, check this out here. Electronic ignition. Not that big a deal in 2025, but when it came out, I do believe this was one of, if not the first production motorcycle to have electronic ignition. So there were some firsts. It made quite a splash when it landed in 1969. Of course, later it spawned the 750cc H2, which that moniker lives on today in Kawasaki supercharged inline fours. The H2 752 stroke in the 70s came to the name the Widowmaker, which was initially applied to this 500cc bike, but it really stuck to the 750 because it was so viciously fast and notoriously difficult to control. And that's a great segue to our ride this morning, everybody, which of course is going to be a little different than most, where you just press the starter button. It does have a starter button. Actually, this is a little sort of start tab, sort of choke that you push in to start it up. Already smells like oil. So I'm going to flick the key on here. I check we got a headlight on. We do. And we're going to fire this bad Nelly up and prepare yourself for quite a racket, everybody. How do you like that? You might have a little more trouble hearing me today than usual, which might be fine. Okay, there you have it. 3 angry cylinders ready to take us to work. All right, everybody. Buckle up. Wait for this sucker to warm up a little bit, and then we are off. The neutral light does work, which is nice because it's a neutral at the bottom gearbox. Kind of strange. Neutral's all the way at the bottom, so you pick up for first and second and so on. There we go. All right, take it easy, little guy. We're rolling. We can talk about specs now. The seat height, which you know I love to talk about at red lights, is around 30 inches, 29.5 I think, though it might be slightly different because the shocks on this bike are aftermarket. It's not too bad to reach the ground, except you'll notice it's a very wide engine. It's practically 2 feet wide beneath you, and the foot pegs stick way out. So even though the seat height's not very high, it's a little bit more intimidating to sit on than you might think. Then you've got that 60 horsepower engine that I talked about, and what other specs? The $1,000 base price, which is equivalent to about $8,700 in 2025 bucks for what it's worth. So, you know, $8,500 bike basically. Other than that, yeah, weighed in on the scale is at about 395 pounds. And yeah, like I said, none of the specs are particularly incredible or anything, especially for a bike that was once so feared on the streets. Like I said, the seat is not remarkable in any way, just sort of long and flat. It's a little, you know, tired, as you might expect from a bike that's this old. Kind of just sink right through the foam and get to the pan. But lots of room to move around, as we'll talk about. The main thing is that the foot pegs feel quite wide. You have your legs really far apart, and there's not all that much legroom because the seat's not super tall. And it has this sort of like flat, soft bend handlebar, which, you know, is very late 60s. It feels old to sit on, you know? It feels like a kind of a strange, dated riding position, which I think we can agree just sort of makes sense. All right, trafficy freeway, not exactly a Kawasaki H1's favored habitat, but let's see how we do. Merging. We'll roll on test, here we go. I mean, it's not super fast for a motorcycle in 2025 or even 1995, but you can imagine the landscape of the motorcycling world in 1969, and there's a lot of British twins, and I mean, a Harley Sportster was a fast bike, and then you had this 390 something pound thing that sounded like a Banshee straight from hell and would actually wheelie in gears above first. It must have been so surprising. So I mentioned that the highway isn't exactly this bike's home turf, and that is true. It has okay manners, you know, you're sitting upright and you can kind of swivel your head around and see where you're going. Of course, this particular bike only has one mirror, which makes things a little tricky. Mostly what you notice is just horrendous vibration. You can sort of see the clutch lever going crazy. Part of that is bumps in the road. Part of it is just the horrendous vibration sent through the handlebars. You get it in the foot pegs and the seat just a little bit, but the handlebars are like, I mean, it's like holding on to a palm sander when you're on the gas. All right, we finally got to 5th gear, top of the gearbox. How is it? You know, yeah, not very good. It's like sitting bolt upright, straight into the wind blast with lots of power, and it feels like there's hundreds of volts going through the handlebar. It's not exactly a touring bike. The good news is fuel mileage is horrendous, so you won't be able to go very far before you're Did I run out of gas right as I was talking about fuel mileage? That would really be something. We're on reserve now. Uh-oh, everybody. That is poetic. Run out of gas right as I was talking about how you're not going to make it very far on a tank of fuel. Alright. Free of traffic, back to the open road. Where the two-stroke wants to live. Crap. Top gear. It says I'm going 75, but I don't think that's true. Alright, last thing we talked about on the highway section here is the mirror. Not mirrors, but mirror. It's pretty bad. It actually could be worse. I'll be honest. I've had worse mirrors on bikes than this one. And that in itself, I think, is kind of impressive and surprising. Look at sitting here idling, though. A fairly pleasant machine in some aspects. Like when it's idling. Just wants to go, go, go. Into the neighborhood section, where we try to do footless stops, but I don't know if I love my chances on this sucker. Nope, messed up the first one. It's one of those bikes that you really find yourself focusing pretty hard on, what else is going on, you know? It's not really a make your skills better kind of motorcycle. It's more like a pay attention all the time kind of motorcycle. Ultimately, the H1's manners are, you know, it has a feared reputation, but, you know, you can get to learn the bike and learn how it handles, and there's just not a lot of feel. Vintage bikes in general, a lot of times, either because they're old or because that was the time in history, there's just, they don't have the same kind of feedback. Oh, I think that was it. I gotta put the stop. All right. The clutch is a little bit vague and the transmission's really numb. You just sort of like feel your foot move and you're like, I guess it's in the next gear. It doesn't have, it's designed to make you feel good as a person or as a rider. It's designed to work as a machine, and it expects you to meet it halfway. Jesus. At least halfway. So I would not call it friendly, but I don't think that any of... Nice, I got another one. I don't think any of what it does is unfair. Just who it is, you know? Signaling, downshifting with no clutch, two-stroke, it handles it pretty well. All right. One of the things that's funny about the flat seat is that when the power comes on really fast, you know, the cover is kind of old and the seat is, like I said, perfectly flat. And so you get on the gas sometimes and it just like slides you back on the seat. It's like this little invisible hand pushing you on the chest. All right, last of the stop signs in the challenge. And I have to say, oh, I think I got it. Nice. I'm surprised that I got any at all. But it goes to show that there are some elemental things about this bike that are good and correct, like the weight of the thing, the size of the thing, right? It's like fairly low, it's not super heavy, and the handlebar is wide. As antiquated and archaic as it feels, it does feel fairly light and small because bikes were just lighter and smaller way back when. And then of course, when you do get on the pipes, plural. Such an angry little beast. Alright, chug along here, 3,500 RPM in third gear, just putt-putting, and it's a good segue to Lover's Lane here, where if you're going to have a passenger on the back of one of these things, you might want to either warn them or take it easy or both. And you know, passenger accommodations in 1869 were a little more thoughtful or prominent, I guess. The seat is basically exactly the same if you slide back on it, and the foot pegs are fairly low, so I think a passenger might actually be pretty comfortable, aside from the obvious ways a passenger will be uncomfortable, which is the same ways the rider will be. Probably some vibrations, a lot of noise, and you might get high off the fumes back there. I think the H1 Mach 3 is best enjoyed by yourself. But you know, if you want to take a passenger, I'm I'm not the boss of you. And here we are, just like that, into the Twisty Road section. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, the H1 not famous for slowing down or going through turns. It was famous for going fast. But as I mentioned in the Round Town Challenge, the H1 actually has some attributes that help it feel pretty good in a situation like this. You know, it's light, it's narrow, it's pretty direct for what it is, you know. Almost 60% of the weight's on the rear tire, which is very unsporty. You do feel like you're sitting back over the rear tire and the front wheel's kind of out in front of you. This was the era of the sort of British style of Norton's, BSAs, Triumphs, that kind of thing. They were rear heavy, street biased motorcycles. But this sucker does okay. It's not where you're going to enjoy it the most. I don't, oh, okay, that's actually fairly dangerous. I leaned over enough to drag something. I didn't mean to do that. Cool, well that's a good reminder that it's not a bike for going through corners, and we don't want to take any more metal off of it. Apologies to the owner, sorry about that. Just focus on going straight, Zach. Part of the reason I dragged something there is probably because of the modern tires. This Continental Classic Attack rubber, which is radial and more or less designed for this kind of bike. One of the reasons this bike was so scary way back when was probably that the tires were truly awful. So, you know, part of the reason that this bike feels more reasonable to ride today in 2025 is the fact that 60 horsepower is not as intimidating as it once was, and part of it is that, you know, the stuff supporting it is a little better, even if it's just the rubber. All right, out of the Twisty Road section, and in a moment here we'll be able to do what the H1 does best, and that's accelerate. All right, off we go, everybody. Little wheelie. It's just infectious. The energy that the engine has is so kind of chaotic and excitable. You know, on this program before I've talked about like the, you know, Kawasaki Ninja 500 engine, or some engines that are small and not super powerful but very playful, like a puppy or something. And this is like that, but much more. It's not that it's a lot faster, it's just that it's so much more exuberant and excitable. It really just is bound to make you chuckle, I think. All right, red light, let's talk about brakes, shall we? I'm going to start braking now because I will show you this is pretty much maximum front brake right now. It is really not good. Really quite not good. It's funny, I read a test of the H1 from 1969 when it first came out, and the tester said the brakes are terrific. I would have to disagree. Oh, also this throttle needs to get rotated so this doesn't hit it anymore. Anyway, the brakes are bad. The rear brake is actually pretty good, which is a relief because you need all the help you can get. Another power wheelie. A little more stressful than my usual ride to work, but I gotta say I'm having fun. All right, sometimes at this stoplight we talk about the dash and how it works, and I'll tell you that we don't need a stoplight for that. There's a speedo, a tack, a neutral light, oil pressure, I think, maybe, or that could be a signal light that doesn't work anymore, and you got an odometer and a trip meter, and that's all you've got, which is good because you should have your eyes forward anyway. With that, I suppose we could jump into the conversation of would you buy this motorcycle just for the engine, and oh my goodness, yes, that's what this motorcycle is, the engine. It's just a legendary power plant that catapulted Kawasaki into household namehood, and also it's stupendous. It's like just raw and wild and too old to be taken seriously in a day like this, but legendary for a reason. And it's probably the reason the owner bought this bike, and I got a lot of respect for that. Okay, so as we get to the end of the ride on the H1 Mach 3, it's important to take a chin scratch and look back in time and see how far we've come, as I talked about in the beginning. You know, we talked about the performance of the bike and how it fits into modern bikes and how it's not really that fast anymore, but the way the power comes on is sort of part of the charm of the whole thing. And I think that just one more time, it's a good idea to, well, you close your eyes, I'm going to keep mine open, And think about what it was like in 1969 to have this thing land and be available. It was just like, it was so kind of stratospheric and powerful in ways beyond the engine, you know, like it created a cultural phenomenon, it created a nickname, it created this whole kind of like lore around two-strokes, which are still kind of burgeoning. And I think one of the reasons was that Kawasaki was bold enough to go for it, if you will. I think that, you know, deserves some credit to... Oh, that might be it. That might be it, everybody. Did we run out of gas? Well, you know, Kawasaki deserves some credit for creating a bike that uses so much gas I didn't put enough in. Okay. Our 19 miles to the gallon led us here. Out of gas on the side of the road. Where maybe some people ended up in the early 70s with this bike, not expecting it to be quite so thirsty. I'm not sure. But boy, we had a fun ride, didn't we? We did a couple wheelies. We didn't get to do our wheelie test. We didn't do the dirt road test because it's a classic and I want to respect the machine as much as possible. And we didn't get to do our U-turn challenge. But, you know, we did learn that it's a fairly light, agile, and sometimes angry motorcycle. Come to think of it, we're stuck on the side of the road here out of gas. That doesn't mean we can't answer some Instagram questions and wrap up this episode. Sure, I've got some stuff to figure out, like how I'm going to get to the office, but you don't need to worry about that right now. Let's see what you all had to say about the H1 Mach 3. First question is from Salron the Green, who says, that's a wide red line. Is it more of a suggestion or will the engine start pinging? Right, so, you know, I took pictures of the taco when I posted this to Instagram and asked for questions, and as you can see, it goes from about 8,500 RPM all the way to 12 grand is sort of the red line. The takeaway there is that that's the generally agreed upon area where it might run out of revs, but two-strokes don't work like four-strokes, right? There's no valve train in there, there's no moving parts in the top end whatsoever. You can't sink a valve into the piston, or you can't overwhelm valve springs. There's none of that stuff. It's just pistons spinning around inside the engine. And so usually what happens with a two-stroke is it just sort of runs out of steam. It just kind of revs up and then revs out, and then you're due to shift and you move on. You can still blow them up by revving them too high. The engine can start pinging, or, you know, the piston crown can overheat, and there can be pre-ignition, and that can be bad. And there's lots of things that can go wrong in a two-stroke engine, but it's different than a four-stroke engine when it comes to redline because you don't have that whole top-end valve train thing to work with or work against or whatever. Next question is from Mr. T2228, who asks, are old two-stroke sports standard bikes good project bikes? I want one so bad, but I have no idea if it's just like a dirt bike. So no, it's not just like a dirt bike. Obviously there are 3 cylinders and 3 carburetors, and it's much more complex. And I would say, yes, it's a good project bike if you want to work on it all the time. If you want to build something and then ride it around and just enjoy it, then you're going to have to do a bang-up job on the project or restoration or whatever it is to make sure that it's, you know, reliable to ride around. Oh, and don't forget to put fuel in it, you know, enough fuel. That's important, just to cover that again. Next question is from John Mark Bennett, who says, is there a bike today that means the same thing, that invokes the feelings that this bike does? I know the new Kawasaki H2 is built with the same silliness in mind, but this one feels different. Has motorcycling lost something great, or is it the foolishness of a bygone era? Well, yeah, this is a good question. And I think it's a little bit of both, right? I think it's a little bit of both. I think it is the foolishness of a bygone era. I mean, it's a stake in the ground that symbolizes and signifies a time when exhaust emissions weren't as big a deal and technology was moving in very different ways, and people were much more able to extract new mechanical things from engines. So, you know, we're just never going to be back to that time. But the good thing is I don't think we've lost something great. I think that's the cool thing about this bike, still on the road, 1969. You can still enjoy it. You can still see it and hear it and smell it. So as long as we care enough to restore and treasure our treasures, then they won't be gone. As for a bike today that means the same thing or does the same thing, I don't know. You know, I'm sure people will argue in the comment section about what it is. Like original FZ09 was sort of wild and weird and crazy, and yeah, maybe that's a good answer. But no, I think it's different. I think it's always going to be different because it's from a different time, as you said. Last question here is from Too Slow For You To Hate, who says, if you were to stick this iconic engine into any 2025 chassis, what bike are you transplanting this engine into? Good question. Well, years ago, Ari and I put a 350 two-stroke twin from a Banshee four-wheeler into a Yamaha R3, and that worked out okay. So maybe like a Ninja 500, maybe like a Z500, because there's no bodywork, so you'd have room for this like 2-foot block of aluminum to fit in there somehow. And I guess maybe, come to think of it, what you'd want to do is find a bike that has a double cradle frame, right? That has this sort of classic double cradle that goes underneath the engine, because that's how it would want to mount. It would be hard to mount it with a twin spar sport bike frame. So something small and sort of like approachable and a little bit antiquated that it would fit in and work. Maybe like a Royal Enfield frame and chassis might work. It's a good question. I'm not sure exactly what. Something with good brakes, I would say. That would be chief among my concerns. All right, thank you everybody for your questions. That was a lot of fun. Stay tuned, will you? I'm going to figure out how to get this thing back to the office, and then we're going to put it on the Daily Rider Classics leaderboard. Stay tuned.
All right, everybody, we made it to Daily Rider HQ. Just to be clear, the H1 is not so fickle and unsophisticated that it needs like premix to be poured into the tank. You can just put premium in there. I don't want to do that because premium has ethanol in it, and the owner doesn't like ethanol in the gas and the carbs and the fuel system, which is totally fair. And so I wandered around trying to find ethanol gas for a minute there, and maybe that cost us. I do apologize for the delay, but I think maybe kind of a poetic end to the H1 legend here on Daily Rider. We have an H1 Mach 3 tab here ready to go on the Daily Rider Classics board. We don't cover this board very often, so as a quick reminder, at the top of the board here, we have the Versus 650 Battletoad, which you could argue is not really a classic. My Daddy-O's BMW R80 GS from 1981. The Honda RC30 from 1990, rounding out the podium. And then, yeah, a bunch of other classics we've covered, including Dave the Gixxer, my own personal KTM 950 Supermoto, and of course, the 1924 Harley-Davidson Model J. Those might be sort of my call-out favorites here. Where does the H1 fit in? Well, a pretty obvious place to start, I think, would be the Yamaha RZ350. That's a liquid-cooled two-stroke twin that we rode. It's from 1985. So quite a bit newer, and I gotta say, a lot more reasonable as a street bike. This bike was just an absolute peach. I loved riding that bike on the street. And I thought, yeah, I ride this thing to work every day or every other day. Anyway, I mean, I'd ride it more often than just every other weekend, you know? Like, it's a great bike and super fun and engaging and sounds cool and all that jazz. The H1, not so much. So it's gonna finish below there. Honda XL 250 from 1974. That our good buddy Ari restored. That's a pretty good daily rider, probably better than the H1. So now we're getting down to another two-stroke, Yamaha DT1. That was the bike that Ari rode across Wyoming, and then also restored. I'm sensing a pattern here. So that's a 1969 250 two-stroke single, dual sport, basically, you know, a dirt bike for the street. And I think that might be where the line is drawn. Dave the Gixxer, I think, is a better street bike than the H1. The DT1 though was similarly kind of ornery and not as fast and arguably not as comfortable. I don't know. That's sort of a toss-up. But I think I'm going to give the nod to the old H1. They're both legends in their own right. The DT1, of course, made quite the mark for Yamaha in that era of motorcycling, as did the H1 for Kawasaki. But I think I'd probably rather have that triple. It's just too wild and engaging and interesting not to want to take to work, I think. Anyway, I hope that you had fun on this ride. I had a blast riding this bike and exploring the sights and sounds and smells of yesteryear, as I said. One last important call out I need to make: in the description of this video, there is a link to an article with more photos and information about this very motorcycle, an article which my buddy Ari wrote, and has lots of cool stuff like an interview with the guy who originally tested and developed the bike and that kind of thing. I hope you'll check that out, and hope you stay tuned for more Daily Riders in the future. As usual, I hope you learned something. I hope you had fun. See you next time.
Hi there. Looking for a 5-gallon pail of T4. Yeah, I just called them. They said they're out. Do you have anything else that's non-ethanol here? Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, I guess we're winging it on this ride. It's not good. It's not good. Didn't think I was going to strike out at 2 different gas stations.